Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome to the meeting room today. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Billy Duran, and Hali Gibson is our co-host and producer. Hali, welcome to the meeting room.
Great to be here. We have a really good guest today.
We do, and a very special friend, Renee Breazeale, will be with us today. Renee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, Renee, I've just finished your book a few weeks ago and actually have already posted some stuff on LinkedIn that was just such a blessing to me to read through Soaring Through Adversity. And as I said before we got started, it was really cool reading your book because I was reading your words and I could hear your voice as I was reading, and got quite tickled at some of the comments that you made. Very blessed to know you, and Hali, Renee and I have known each other for quite a while. We started working on a project together, kind of formed this brother-sister kind of thing where, you know, she discovered I was an Alabama fan and I found out she was a Tennessee fan, and then we became Bama and Rocky Top, and that's how we spoke to each other. So Rocky Top, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Bama.
So we know that you have been in the business for over 30 years and just have successfully sold your business. And, you know, we're going to talk to you about what it was being a business owner. Renee has served her customers in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Poland, Brazil. She is an innovator, a leader. And now she's using her time as an entrepreneur. Some of her latest ventures include Victory in Time, providing mentoring through mastermind groups for business owners. Renee, don't let me not come back and talk about that, the mastermind groups, executives and emerging leaders. So I find that all of your accomplishments listed, and then at the very end you put, last but most important, you talk about your faith and being a mom and particularly a grandmother, and I really appreciate you saying that. So well done on putting this wonderful bio together. So we are looking forward to having you with us today because the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, we bring leaders in just like yourself from all over the country, and we talk about your experiences. And, you know, we know as executive leadership, there's all sorts of experiences, and you have not only been successful in your business, you're now have successfully transitioned to be called a former owner of a business into now the work that you're doing with the mentoring, and then the work you're doing with your foundation. And we're going to let you talk about that some more. But it's been great knowing you over the years as a business owner, and particularly reading your book, you know, as a fastener nerd myself. You know, I was really intrigued with all the fastener drop-in pieces. But it has been a really cool watching you move from, you know, being that hard driving owner, entrepreneur, growth minded, now moving into that philanthropy part of your life where you're giving back. And I'm so appreciative of what you're doing. So before we get into the leadership piece, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with your give back through your foundation?
Well, you may remember I went through a time where I was unable to walk from a brain tumor. And from that perspective, it gave me a whole new appreciation of what it's like for people with disabilities. Plus the fact that my husband's younger brother had Down syndrome. So it just seemed that God put us in a position to give back in the form of a way to help people with disabilities live independently. And so there's several different aspects of it where we do grant funding for, you know, transportation, grants for independent housing, home improvement so that someone can live in their house. We kind of say that we do where ADA leaves off. To the extreme of construction inside the home so that somebody doesn't have to go to extended rehabilitation. One of the things that I like, my husband always wanted to be able to give seed money to small businesses to start. So this took on a whole different level when we started talking about doing the same thing, but only people with disabilities. And I'll give you an example. A man that was an artist, but he didn't have the money to get the paints and everything that he needed. And now he's at a time in his life where he's actually selling paintings and having a source of income from that perspective. And then, equipment that may be needed. But our capital campaign, which we're looking at, would be for, starting out with land and then literally constructing an apartment complex or condominiums that's got a central living area for people to have a sense of community, to be all inclusive. So it's a big undertaking. I know how to run a business. So I'm looking at this as keeping the business model going. It's just, what we make will go back to the organization and can help people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'm very proud of you for the work that you're doing in your post Victory Bolt. Go from Victory Bolt to the Victory Foundation to the Victory in Time, all the things that are connected to your story. And what a great platform you've created to continue to be able to tell your story through the book and other speaking engagements. And at the end today, we'll give you an opportunity to let people know how they can get in touch with you. So to pivot towards leadership a little bit, Renee, this is the nuts and bolts of leadership, and we like to talk about what leadership looks like. And really, I'm going to pull some quotes from the book and maybe let you expand on that. And you state clearly in your book that being accepted as a leader is often a challenge. So how would you encourage young leaders to lean into that being uncomfortable is okay, just do it anyway?
Well, being one of the first outside industrial female salespeople, it came with challenges. So there were a lot of times when I might have been fearful, but I just did it. But there's an example that I talk about going from the bank to an industrial supply house when I walked into the building and, grease everywhere and we're going back in time where this stuff was allowed with posters with half naked women on it. And I'm standing there going, oh my gosh, do I stay? Do I go? But I wanted to see what kind of opportunity was there. Because at that point, I was working in a bank, making minimum wage and living out of the trunk of my car. So I had nothing to lose. And it was absolutely amazing. And if I had not stayed and met a mentor and boss by the name of Jack Jones, who changed the trajectory of my whole entire life, I would have missed out.
So, Renee, would it be fair to say then in some of our emerging leaders that are listening, they find themselves in a spot that they feel a little uncomfortable in, maybe to approach a mentor, maybe to approach someone who's kind of walked in those shoes a little bit and say, how would you navigate these waters? How would you encourage those emerging leaders to seek out that mentor type relationship that you just described?
Well, I think that is highly recommended. I was in a forum group for many years, and it was predominantly male. But being in the marketplace that I'm in, that was the most advantageous for me at the time. Now, with organizations like, the women in fastener industry, there's just so many, and it's gotten so broad with inclusivity that, if they can be encouraged to seek out a mentor or a mastermind group, I would highly encourage it, because you're getting not just, in a mastermind group, you're not just getting a mentor, you're getting a room full of mentors of varying ages. Just because we say emerging leaders, it may be somebody that's 40 years old, but has just entered the market, which is tremendous with their knowledge outside of the workforce and what they can bring in. So everybody has something to offer in a mastermind group. And that's why I wanted to do this, because I felt obligated to give back some of these stories and these lessons that I learned, in hopes that not only can I share the victories, but that these people will be able to hear where I fell short, and hopefully they won't do the same.
Right. Some of the mastermind group we're talking about is, we're all emerging. We're all emerging leaders. Doesn't matter if you're emerging from one level to another. There's always some faction of emerging that we're going through leadership journey. One of the things you talk about in your book is, transitioning from doing business with businesses versus doing business with people. So when you were out there selling not only your product, but you began selling the company, how important did that become? Because you talk about it in the book. People want to do business with people, not just businesses. So what does that mean to you? What does that look like?
I think for me, it was about being authentic. I know I went through some different things, my Southern accent. Some people didn't take that very seriously, but because I was myself, they saw that, I did what I said I was going to do. I've said this before, you can teach people nuts and bolts, but you can't teach them to be service-minded. You can't teach them to think of others first, and then, what you're looking for will come. That's how I did it from the service standpoint and finding solutions for the customers. It was absolutely amazing.
So you say that, but how do we have to accomplish that? We have to accomplish teaching the strength of who you are, that genuineness, being authentic. It is a tool. Obviously you can pull open a book and say, here's a flat washer, here's a nut, here's a bolt. But how have you taught your team and the people around you about being authentic and how to be a servant leader? How did you do that through the years?
First of all, I made them feel like a team. And through that opportunity, I also, spoke with them. They saw that I was authentic. And when I would talk to customers and how I would train them was, put the service first. And I may be jumping ahead here a little bit, but, the sign that I mentioned in the book that I had, do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. I added a statement along the way that said, even if you don't want to, because that's huge. There's a time when you've just got to pick up that phone, which is another piece to this. Don't hide behind emails. Don't hide behind text messages. Get out there and build a relationship with these people. Show them who you are, but also in the process, learn who they are so that you can service them in a way that meets their needs, not in the way of what you think you need to do for them. And that's huge. And that's what I always taught my people, was to find out what their needs are and meet them where they're at, solve their problems. And that is the service mentality right there.
So see, now you done stop preaching and gone to meddling now. When you start talking about picking up that phone, that's what they say about them preachers. You done stop preaching and gone to meddling. We would have this conversation often around our building. And look, Haley and I, we talked about this today before we even had started the podcast. Strategies and methods change over the years. Strategies and methods change, but there's nothing like the personal touch of picking up that phone. You can hear urgency. You can hear passion. You can hear a lot of things that are not spoken through text messages and emails. So well said. Another quote from your book, you talked about you can't change the people around you, but you can change the people that surround you. So in that context, separating ourselves from people that are kind of pointing us in the wrong direction, how would you speak to leaders, particularly developing leaders or emerging leaders that are coming into the business these days, that be careful who you hang around with, because if you're not careful, you will become them. And sometimes those people are holding us back.
There's an analogy that my dad taught me, and it has stuck with me. So imagine with me that I'm standing up on a table, and there's someone that is not as driven as I am, but I'm trying to change them and pull them up on the table with me. The odds are much greater that they're going to pull me off the table and down on their level. And, when you put that image into play, and then recently I spoke at Wingate University, and I put up a slide that for these young people that said, if you hang with the chickens, you're going to cluck. And if you fly with the eagles, you're going to soar. There's different versions that we've heard that our whole life, but that's just the way it is.
One of our favorite football coaches, I know Nick Saban's one of your fans. You're a huge fan of Alabama football, but one of our favorite football coaches, I just read this. I actually didn't know he had ever said this, but one of the things he said, coaching high school coaches at a clinic, he talked about that high-performing people don't like to hang out with mediocre people, and mediocre people don't like to hang out with high performing people. And reading through your book and some of the people that you actually came in not only to partner with, they just weren't able to keep up. They did not work at the standard that you expected from them. So that was a revealing. I mean, that was an important part of the book for me, to say that you are a person who has a certain standard when it comes to performance and behavior. Tell our audience a little bit about why that became so important to you. This is a standard, and you got to meet the standard.
Well, I think, with that service mentality, when as an owner, you think about how many people the company actually supports. It's not the fact that you've got employees, you've got the employees, you've got your vendors, there's so many people. Some people think they're going to start a business because they are their own boss. That's just not how it is. You've got so many people that you are responsible for. But one of the things that I've always done is make them feel like a team, and make everybody understand nobody is more important than the other person. As I said, you can teach products, but you can't teach the mentality of, say the truck driver understands that he's not just, the truck driver. Without him delivering the product, what I sold doesn't make any difference. And we would go through that periodically to make everybody feel like they were somebody, no matter what their title is. They are a leader, and to have that leadership mentality. And that was huge for us. And the other part of that was the financial side. We looked at it like, if you serve, then the finances will come. And so, we had bonus programs in place so that, it wasn't tiered toward, well, you don't make as much money from, the position that you handle, so you get a percentage of that. It was a percentage of the profit. And that really said a lot to everybody, that what they were doing meant something, because if they didn't do their job, then somebody else didn't get what they deserve.
Right. And oftentimes our drivers are some of the greatest ambassadors to the company. They're the ones that are seeing at the back door, and you can get a lot of information from the back door that never comes through the front door. So I appreciate you saying that and pointing that out, because our team members, we created this podcast originally so that we could communicate to our team the importance of leadership and what that looks like at every level of our organization. And, when we're speaking about truck drivers and material handlers and the people that are doing what we call the nitty-gritty work, that work we can't do what we do if everyone isn't doing their part. So I appreciate you picking up on that and speaking directly to that leadership development through the entire company and taking that ownership mentality. Renee, you talk a lot about your inner compass, and, what is that like for you as you develop as you develop a way to pay attention to your inner compass. And tell us a little bit about what that is. Tell our audience about what it is to have that inner compass.
For me, a lot of people are familiar with that gut instinct, and I think that is very valuable. What's your heart telling you? What's your mind telling you? Also, the inner compass involves doing your due diligence. You just can't jump out there. But I have a saying, which is where Victory in Time came from, is faith first, not last. Living the Eagle way will lead to victory in time. That being said, I can't do anything without prayer. But I can say that it's faith first, not last, because, there was a lot of times when I would just jump out there and go with that gut instinct and say, ooh, I can do this, and a lot of times it was just my competitive edge taking over, like, okay, I'm going to beat Bama with this one, whether God intended for me to do it or not. So, it was like, don't jump out there and then say, get everything rolling. And then you're like, oh, God, literally, what have I done? Now, how do I, roll this thing back? So faith first, not last is important, that I want people to understand that message.
Very good.
So my inner compass has a lot to do with my faith.
Yeah, very good. Haley?
I love how you talked about earlier and kind of on that aspect of you don't have to have a certain title to be a leader. So your drivers are your leaders, your packagers are your leaders, everybody's a leader. And if you're waiting on a title to become a leader, then you need to kind of reevaluate what leadership means to you. Another quote from your book says, demonstrate what you can become. How did you use stretch goals? We've talked about stretch goals in a previous podcast, not only for yourself, but for your team to make a better company.
I think the quickest way to prove to me that you have less potential than what I thought was for you to say, that's not my job. Because then that says you're not a team player, that you don't have the customer or whatever entity it is you're working for best interest at heart. And that just really, moves me the wrong direction. One of the things that I talk about in the book a lot is, and you've got victory volts, you got victory in time. I mean, I love Eagles and the aspect in Isaiah 40:31. And so I say you allow other people to soar. And that means that allow people to let you know what their gifts are. And the only way you know what their gifts are is to allow them to stretch and do different things. And that, everybody's heard the term, put the person in the right seat on the bus. So it may be that you find somebody that's stretching and they belong on another seat. And it could be a person that's not doing really well in the seat they're in, but they are not in a position to use their gifts. And so, not my job and allow them to soar is two very good stretch rules, I think.
Well, and I would say one of the things that was so incredible that somewhere along the way you recognized that in order for you to move out into other areas, you had to backfill some of the work you were doing. And one of the quotes from the book that I love the most is when you found out that you were replaceable, you became unstoppable. And that was really, really gained a lot of momentum as I was reading the book, because, I mean, as business owners and developed leaders start thinking about the next generation of leaders in their company, I mean, we've got an organization that we want to build a perpetual model. We want our model to go on, for years. And in order to do that, you've got to backfill that generation, that generational leadership. And I have quickly become so in tune with how replaceable I am and how unnecessary it is. when you come to terms with that, it's humbling, number one, but it's very gratifying, because that means that you're building the right team around you. So tell us a little bit about what that epiphany was like when you came to, when you become replaceable, you really become unstoppable.
Well, and Billy, I want to say you have done a fantastic job at that. I mean, the growth that you have experienced is just phenomenal. So good job. Well done. I think I was in a position early on in my career when I had a customer. I was competing in a very large arena, much larger than what I really had the capacity or capability to do. But my competitiveness took over again. And I'm like, this would really put me on the map. Then they come to do the audit, and the guy looked at me and he said, what happens if you die? And I'm like, oh, that was a huge question, which started me putting stuff in place, not just training, but paperwork, like what happens if I die, or you've heard the term get hit by a bus. So I started putting everything to place, and it wasn't long after that I broke my back. So I was down for the count. And so I waited for about a month or 6 weeks, and I called this guy back. And I said, do you remember you asked me what happens if I die? And I said, and I was kind of taken aback by it, but I really appreciate the question, because I did get my ducks in a row, so to speak. And I said, so the question is, what would happen if I broke my back? And he said, what? I said, yes, I broke my back. I can't remember, 6 weeks ago, and you couldn't tell the difference. So it was a very strong moment, because if you look at it later on with the brain tumor, that was, a whole different thing. And I don't want people to think, you've got to get your company set up because you're going to have a major adversity. That's not the thing. Then later on in 2019, when the opportunity came along to sell the company, that was key. They didn't want a company that was going to have me there 24/7 in order to keep that going. And that was something that I was able to pride myself on. And right here, I have to talk about my husband, Ray, because, yes, I started the company, I founded the company, and even my children call it my firstborn child, which is kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. But I had the brain tumor in '08, and he was here to take care of me in a manner that I didn't think was possible. But when you think about '08, and literally it was like just turning the faucet off with the water, and it was terrible. So we went from a lot of employees, 50, which I know, Billy's not a lot to you, but for me it was huge, down to 8, including Ray and myself. So that was an opportunity when you're talking about, allowing people to soar and to spread their wings. He took on all the operations, and I did all the sales and the purchasing side. So he did the back end, I did the front end. And it was one of the first times that I had allowed that to happen. And we grew back not to even as many employees as that, but with the equipment purchases that we made, we actually ended up being more profitable, which later, allowed us to be sold. So it's amazing. It's amazing.
It is an amazing story, and we're going to pick up right there. We're going to take a real quick break, and we're going to come out and we're going to hear about who Charlie Hurt is. This is one of the greatest parts of the whole book. So this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the meeting room, and we're on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. This is an incredible episode. Great friend of ours, Renee Breazeale, is here with us, a former owner of Victory Bolt, and Renee's been talking to us about her leadership journey, not just her leadership journey, her journey in general, which is an amazing story. You can pick up a copy of her book, Soaring Through Adversity. Renee, where can they find your book? Where can the audience find your book?
If you would like an autographed copy, you can get it on victoryintime.com, or you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Okay. And we'll put that at the end as well. So Renee, when we were going to a break, I kind of teased the audience, and now we're coming back. I want you to tell our audience who Charlie Hart is and introduce him to our listening audience.
Well, it's interesting because you asked me earlier about comfort zone, and this is definitely an example of bumping into that comfort zone and trying to figure out a way to do business at a time when the Asian market did not prefer to work with women. And, a lot of your listeners are not going to understand how I hid behind the name Charlie Hart, which my last name was Hart at the time, and my first name is Charlotte. And it's funny because my nickname in school, some of the people call me Charlie. And on a side note, I have a granddaughter named Charlie Hart now, which is absolutely amazing.
That's funny.
But she's precious. She's precious. But back in the day, you had fax machines. You didn't have computers. You didn't have, nobody could see what I look like. You had catalogs that you did your research with. So, we had faxes going back and forth, and my name became Charlie Hart. And there's another piece to this that I can't remember if it's in the book or not, but I started a company called Exclusive Industrial Imports at the same time. And the reason I did that was I didn't want some of the other vendors that I had to realize I was direct importing, for fear that they may change my pricing structure, that kind of thing, because I knew I would still need them for backup. So it was a total reinvention in order to do business in Asia. And like I mentioned, that big account that asked me about, what happened if I died, I had to direct import to make this happen. So the funny thing is when I landed in Taiwan, the lady that had done the similar thing, she was the VP of one of the largest fastener manufacturers in Taiwan, met me there. And she automatically went to the gentleman that was with me to shake his hand and said, Charlie Hart. And then I said, no, I'm Charlie Hart. And we had a blast. That trip was absolutely amazing. she was one of the best people that I've ever worked with. And I think one of the funniest parts is, when you do business in Taiwan in particular, our eating habits are very different. And the Taiwan people are very service oriented. Well, every day when I would get back to my hotel room, she would stuff apples and candy bars in my purse, afraid I was going to get hungry at night because Americans eat more than the Taiwanese do. So it was such a great lesson to reinvent. And I encourage anybody not to step back and say, okay, I can't do it. Find a way.
Find a way. Find a way. And even if you have to go employ Charlie Hart, there's always a way a means to the end. So I appreciate that story. I got a kick out of it. I told you when I was reading this on the airplane, I cracked up several times, and the person I was sitting next to said, that really must be a good book. So you mentioned Ray earlier, Renee, and how much he has meant to not only your personal journey, but even in your business journey. And one of the things that you talk about in the book, and it was whether it's a low time in your life or not, but that Ray had this ability to encourage you to dream. And I think the quote was, come into Ray's world and dream a while. And I was very encouraged by that because it really speaks about your relationship with your husband. And, all of us have business relationships, but those relationships in our home, how they ground us in order for us to be able to do what we do. And whether through that, that support mechanism or just the encouragement that comes from having a great partner both in and out of the business. So can you talk a little bit about how Ray became such a vital part of your story?
Well, when he asked me, when he said, come into Ray's world, we were still dating and we had not known each other that long. So at first I was like, okay, he's just hitting on me. But I started getting to know him, and what he meant was, what are your dreams? And that was what he asked me. What are your dreams? And I started rolling off a list, and he said, that's all about work. And I thought about it, and I didn't have any dreams outside of work. I had been so devoted to the business side of it. And because I'd had some difficulties in my personal life, that was where I felt the most complete. And so during that period of time, I took a look at it and I learned, and I call this separating my who from my do, trying to understand that it's not what you do that's important, it's who you are. And you don't have to have the title. You just be who you are, but have a life outside of work. I would encourage that highly. And he has enabled me to do that.
Well, I think that would be one of our nuggets already. I can think about the separating my who from my do. That's a piece we talk about this a lot. As a matter of fact, we probably spend more time in our marketing campaigns talking about who we are as much as we do what we do. And even how that rolls in from your story into our personal life in our business world and finding that balance. One of the things that I loved about your story is how you brought people in a collaborative way and seeking that heart-centered collaboration. I wrote about this a few weeks ago, and particularly about when we become heart-centered in our collaboration, egos have to go out the door. And it allows us to move from that whole we, not I thing. And it sounds like, Renee, you made a big part of your career building teams, growing teams. And, when it comes to that, we got business owners that are listening right now, and they would love to have that in their operation. How would you encourage them to get started in building a heart-centered collaboration?
I think that encouraging your people to understand why they're doing what they're doing, not just giving them a job description, but helping them understand the end results of what they're trying to achieve, putting their heart in it, and not at the end of the day, you're going to get a bigger paycheck, but look at the people that you're servicing when you find out what their needs are. It's absolutely key to forming a team and to helping others. It's their mindset. And it won't go unnoticed, for the rest of the team, because everyone has got the common goal.
So, Renee, when you were in meetings with leadership, your leadership teams, and you were running the meeting, obviously you're the owner, you're the one that's in charge. How did you learn how to kind of push back from the table a little bit and let your team work as opposed to you driving the conversation, being a part of the conversation? What was that transition like?
And that's something, you learn along the way. I mean, the book, Soaring Through Adversity, is life lessons. And that is one I wish I had done better.
So, Renee, when you were building your leadership team and talking about this collaborative efforts, what was it like to sort of push back from the table and watch your team? And, we all can think about how we could have done that better. And, you have a great perspective now because, you've moved on to the next phases of your leadership journey. What was it like building the team and you kind of pushing back instead of, just messaging team building? You're more about building the team now instead of just driving the message. You were more driving the team building piece of your work.
Yeah, I think one of the things that might have been different on my side is I wish I had to push back from the table a little bit more. But as we're having this conversation, one of the things that I did that's kind of different from what other corporations do is we were small enough that I didn't just meet with the executive team. I met with various people within the organization that had a face in front of the public, in front of our customers, rather than having meetings with the executives and then it being the trickle information that that they feel like the other people needed. And I talk about the truck driver, it could be the guy in packaging, go around and meet with the people where they worked. How's it going back here? Are you getting your information correct? Are you working? Is the customer procedure? Because a lot of times we would set up a particular customer procedure. It wasn't the procedures of just Victory Bolt. It was the customer specific procedure so that we could get it, out the door the way they wanted it. So meeting the employee in their place of whether it's packaging or doing the flange packs or in quality assurance, how are things going? And that way, I think people felt like they had a voice all throughout, up and down, sideways, and then the customer had the result. So, like I said, maybe there were times where I didn't push back from the table enough, but I'm hoping I gave them enough of a voice that the customer was satisfied and they felt like they enjoyed their job. And, as I'm thinking about it, we had people that were there 25 of the 32 years. So maybe they did enjoy their job.
Well, I can tell you this, and I know a bunch of those people and spoke to them even after you left, while you were there, and even after you left. And here are the words. Here's the words that describe Renee from her team. This is the words: genuine, driver, try to match me. These are the words that I heard from your team, and you built and created an incredible organization, and you left it in good shape. And that's what to me is really the mark of a great leader, is one that leaves it for the next generation to pick up and run with it. So I would say, well done there. Your book is a faith story. It's a faith story. It's about dynamic leadership. It's about challenges of businesses and life. It's a great book. And again, I want to applaud you for your success on the book. But tell me, what was the motivation and why you wanted to write the book? Why did you want to write the book?
Well, I wondered when the buyers approached me, and the company that bought it, there's no doubt in my mind God sent them to me. That didn't mean I accepted it. I fought him every step of the way, but he was a pastor. And so I felt like there was a reason behind that. I just didn't know what. And then COVID hit. And I was like, now I get it, because a lot of things would have changed. And part of my issue with changing was my health. And I do walk with a limp, and it was getting harder to travel. And so from that perspective, I had been told prior to that, when I was at a speaking engagement, a publisher came up to me and whispered in my ear, "You should write a book." So I'm standing on the back porch looking at the water, hearing about COVID, and I was like, I hear her in my head, "You should write a book." So when I started writing the book, it was about business. But I quickly figured out how intertwined my business life and my personal life really was. My business life and my personal life was so intertwined, and the victories and the adversities were affected by both. So as I went through, I determined that I wanted people to know that running a company is not all roses. It's tough. You're not your own boss. If you think you're going to work 11 to 4 and have a personal life, you're not going to. So, but I also wanted people to know the personal side of, I went through domestic violence, and it was something that people looked at me and said, there was such a persona back then of a stigma on people that went through that. And they would look at me and say, "You're a strong woman. How did that happen to you?" So I wanted people to see that it comes from all walks of life, that there's no particular kind of person that goes through domestic violence. I was just blessed because I had never been in that situation to know that it was wrong. In the process, I had to give up everything and start over. And that's the kind of stuff that I wanted my readers to learn, that we're real. We're not setting up on this pedestal as a business owner and everything is just fantastic.
Renee, I haven't had the privilege of reading your book yet, but I do know from Billy that it is just a real book about you and about your journey. I know we always talk about all of the books that are people are reading, but if we can encourage you to go and find this book, I think it would be great. And finally, in speaking directly to our audiences, because this is a leadership podcast, what advice would you give leaders who are serious about growing within their organization, or they're maybe thinking about starting their own business?
Well, whatever you do, whether you're working your way up or whether you're wanting to start your own business, be passionate about it. Make sure you know why you're doing it. And I think that a competitive nature is always helpful in that situation, because you're going to have people around you that you're competing with. You're going to have customers or vendors that you're competing with. I think that's good. I also think you need, that capital mindset. It's not that that's why you do what you do, but you serve first and then that will come.
So Renee, when you were putting together not only the book, but you were putting on, there was constantly this reinvention of the business model. As I read through the book, I actually didn't know all the different things that you were working through and working on. This innovation, this idea, this sounds like a way we should go. And sometimes those things, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. From a business owner's perspective or a potential entrepreneur who wants to get out there and explore, every idea isn't the best idea. Sometimes we prove this isn't the direction to go. So speak a little bit about that part of the journey, that, some things we tried and they just didn't work. That doesn't necessarily mean it was a failure. We just proved this isn't the right direction.
Yes, I let my competitive nature and ego get the best of me. And it says in my bio that I'm a patent designer and owner. And I tried to revolutionize the fastener industry with a product called Uniscrew. And it was a one driver bit system from a number 4 diameter to a 1/2 inch, which I'm talking nuts and bolts here. But it was a great product, but I partnered with the wrong people. And it was a nuance like none other. It was people around the world. They didn't have the same mentality. It was all about the financial statement for them. And for me, it was about getting the product right and getting the product that the customers need, not the products that we said we thought would sell the most, which that was my mindset. I wanted to accomplish both at the same time. But it was not a failure in the aspect of, with the amount of money that I lost, I should have lost everything. In fact, Ray came home one day and I was standing in the kitchen, and being the human that I am and not afraid to tell it, I was crying. And he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "We could lose everything." And he said, "Baby, I would live in a tent with you." And I've got a joke that I say, I went from the trailer park to the country club. And I was like, "Oh, please don't let me go past the trailer." So it was, I should have lost everything. And we ended up being better than we were from the lessons that we learned along the way.
Well, I can tell you this, reading the book and knowing your story, I've read the back of the book and you won. That's the cool part. Sometimes in the middle of it, in the middle of the fight, we wonder how it's going to end. You've been there, you walked in the fire, you came out on the other side of it, and, victory, describing you, victory to me sounds like the perfect word. When we look at Victory in Time, the author, Soaring Through Adversity, co-founder, executive director of Victory Advantage Foundation, you're involved in this, not only the entrepreneurial spirit, but this philanthropy side of your business. I mean, your world right now is just growing incredibly. So, Renee, before we go, can you tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to come alongside? We've talked about how they can get the book, but how can they come alongside you and your foundation work, or if they wanted to contact you about speaking at one of their events?
If you go to victoryintime.com, you can sign up for and be part of the team. You can go online and you can book me to speak. You can purchase the book. You can sign up for the mastermind groups. The mastermind groups, we're really, at this point, we're kind of redefining and going into more of a course mode, especially for these emerging leaders. So we're building interest right now. So, please come on, sign on, and let's talk about, what's next there. And then the foundation it's victoryadvantage.org. And you can go on there, you can fill out an application to volunteer, be a board member, or as we talked about earlier, you can apply for a grant and just keep up with what we're doing in the community for IDD and physical disabilities. It's absolutely amazing. The needs that we see that are out there is, with the housing market the way it is and how expensive it is to rent, people are living with their parents for an extended period of time, and the parents are aging, and we're hearing that all the time that, John can live on his own, but he can't afford it, and I'm now 70 years old. So those are the kind of people that we want to serve, and I'm blessed. I am truly blessed. I want to mention one more thing. The foundation has evolved into the creation of a podcast. And it is in the very first stages, but my goal is to interview people with disabilities, to give them a voice, to make them feel less lonely, to have them tell the community how they can become aware of what the needs are, how they can benefit people with disabilities. And like I say, it's in the very first stages. I've just lined up some equipment. I mean, it is so new, but I would encourage you to kind of follow along. And once I get that up and running, that information can be found on thevictoryadvantage.org as well.
Well, I appreciate you letting us know that. And we can link that information once you get it back to our website on the podcast links that we have. We can direct people there from that as well. So, Renee, thanks again for being on the podcast. I've enjoyed our time catching up, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're back in the meeting room. Hali and I are going to wrap this up. Hali, what were your takeaways from Renee Breazeale?
I had a couple of takeaways. I think she mentioned the chicken and the eagle, which reminded me of Grant Mooring's Chicken, Eagle, Duck. Yeah. So I thought that was a great tie-in to, making sure that you have the right people in the right place. She mentioned the bus. I know you talk about the bus all the time. You need the right people in the right seat on the right bus. And all of those great things. One of the big things, though, is she talked about pushing back from the table, pushing away from the table, which I thought that was a new concept to us. I know that there's the book called Lean In, especially for women in the industry. You need to lean in during a meeting and lean into the opportunities and all of those different things. But once you get to a certain level, you need to start pushing back and deciding when it's time to let go of some things. And I think that's something that I find challenging. I like to be in the thick of all of it. So kind of leaning back and letting your team do some of the different work, I think is a great leadership nugget for this.
Yeah, and I like separating my who from my do. I mean, I know that sounds it sounds catchy, but quite frankly, it's very strong statement. When when we're tying everything that who we are around what we do, we're out of balance. We've got to strike the balance. I do think that Renee had such great points today, but there's a part of that conversation today that just reminded me of sometimes being a business owner is a grind. It's a grind. It's not, she said, if you expect to be a business owner, show up at 11, go home at 4 every day, you're in the wrong arena. I think business ownership at times, you think about the owner who comes in early and is picking up paper all the way across the parking lot and the last car to leave many afternoons sort of describes what that grind is like sometimes. But the blessing and benefit from team building, pushing away from the table, we talked about this at our company from micro, macro type leadership, knowing when to lean in, knowing when to lean out is a key part of the leadership journey. And, and I actually appreciate the fact that she said, I probably didn't do enough of that, or I could have done that sooner. Sometimes when we have leaders on here, I love the fact that they're vulnerable enough to say, I didn't do everything right. I learned from the things I could have done differently. So it was great to have Renee Breazeale on our podcast today, former owner of Victory Bolt, and now she is involved in so many different, continuing the journey with her philanthropy work, also her leadership journey. So thanks to Renee to being on the podcast. Haley, until we meet again, tighten up.
Tighten up. Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.